Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing the three different government types here in EU5, the Republic, the Monarchy, and of course the Theocracy. We're going to be discussing and focusing primarily on the main strengths of each of these and discussing which one is best, but very broad strokes, I do think that the best is probably Monarchy by a small margin, mainly because they get access to fiefdoms, but we will get into the bells and whistles of each of these as we go through them. Alright, kicking things off with the one that I think is weakest, we have the Theocracy. As far as advances go, they actually get a bunch of, medium, solid-ish advances, which is pretty nice, especially in the early game. They kind of had their nice little showing with Conviction of Sin, being one of the better ones with 2.5% all estates, satisfaction, equilibrium. 10% manpower is also pretty nice. Government reforms, nothing crazy to write home about, unless you have a unique one that's tied to the flavor of your nation, in which case that's not really a result of the Theocracy themselves. They have a couple of good policies in law. For the theocratic leadership law category, they get 5% tax efficiency, which is quite nice. And for divine cause, they do get 5% literacy. These are kind of the big ones to write home about. They do get some nice privileges. In particular, they have a lot of privileges that feel relatively free to slot in. Stuff like sponsoring printing of religious texts, so you will be getting a pretty solid chunk of estate satisfaction equilibrium. In particular, you can get a lot on the nobles, so taxing the nobles will be easier on the Theocracy, and their big kind of thing is control of the borderlands. Every single one of these government types has a really big proximity bonus. The Theocracy happens to get theirs on an estate privilege, so they will be getting access to it early on, and it is also going to give 10% satisfaction equilibrium to the nobility, so proximity cost through land is going to be what they are receiving here. So one of the difficulties of theocracies and also republics is going to be sourcing crown characters, and this is a really significant disadvantage. You can't pick a succession law that really allows you to farm crown characters, almost said clown characters. Even the one that is matrilineal isn't going to allow for royal marriages. You can go for this, but then it will break your ability to do marriages, and so you won't actually be able to develop a crown stable, which is an important aspect of maintaining and getting a high crown power. We say Utrecht does have a high crown power here, but they are getting no modifiers as a result of having their ruler leading stuff, or having any crown powers leading stuff, or having crown powers in the cabinet. This is particularly painful early on when this is going to be your largest source of crown power, and so this is a very significant issue with the theocracies. So this issue is present for republics as well, where you will only have access to this matrilineal non-exclusive, where you are currently, at this juncture, not allowed to get marriages to actually curate a line, despite it looking like something that is going to be a normal line of succession. Now, for both of these, you are going to have access to a meritocratic version of succession, or for both theocracy and republic, but you also gain access to that in a monarchy if you so choose. And so having a really competent leader is going to be present for all of them, although having the ability to elect someone that is not from your dynasty is going to generally result in higher tier rulers, and so you might consider this a very significant advantage, or that the drawback of not getting as many crown power characters is lower by virtue of you being able to elect people like this, where you're going to have a ton of administrative and diplo abilities, something to this effect. Not present in kind of the pre-game screen is one of the biggest bonuses of being able to go Republic, which is going to be the Merchant and Peasant Republic government reforms. Now, this is going to give you a bunch of bonuses to trade in maintenance, capacity, and income being multiplicatively effective with your trade efficiency. And there's some kind of strange things going about trade right now, which I think are possibly going to change, which is that trade maintenance is effectively free, so this doesn't really represent a strong modifier. If trade maintenance were expensive, this would be a strong modifier. And then also trade income, currently it doesn't make much sense as a result of how trades add expense to, or add size to the economic base. It doesn't make too much sense to run trade routes that are making below 1 ducat, let's say, of income per month. If this changes, then pushing trade more and more and more will become more effective, but it's way easier to have lucrative trade and profitable trade with the Merchant Republic slot in. Foreign building costs does apply to foreign buildings specifically, and this used to apply to all buildings as long as they were built in foreign lands, but you can reduce this to minus 90% with this, and so this is going to make all the foreign trade buildings incredibly efficient, and is going to be something that is valuable. You don't get the free government reform slot anymore, and which is kind of some of the changes to Merchant Republic are why I think that, generally speaking, Peasant Republic is probably better now. The big kind of right homes are you get peasant to state satisfaction equilibrium, so you'll be able to tax the peasants more. It's going to be very strong, in particular if you have a good source of peasant max tax, and then you are also getting extra production efficiency here, which is going to be nice in kind of all circumstances. Better in the early game before you have more and more production efficiency, but production efficiency almost always is going to increase the profitability of buildings by a margin that is greater than the percent efficiency, and it can even take buildings that are not profitable and make them profitable, and it is getting you all of this, or giving you all of this with a free government reform slot, so it doesn't put any pressure on your government reform slots whatsoever. And so I do think Peasant Republic is probably better than Merchant Republic, at least at this juncture. Alright, so jumping in to look at their advances, we have a bunch of really solid ones, starting with Bill of Rights. Pop join Rebel Threshold. If you're expanding a lot and you're facing down a lot of rebels, this is pretty nice, especially if you stack this modifier. You can get it to the point where it's very, very difficult for them to join, especially if you have high religious tolerance of heathens. There are going to be some other modifiers in here that are pretty strong. Army morale 10% is going to be good. Mercenary size, I think if regulars slash mercenaries get buffed, this will be really, really nice in ages 3 and 4, in particular in a multiplayer context, allowing you to rapidly ramp up your army, especially if you have a big kind of bank that you're sitting on. Trade capacity 5% is going to be nice. Trade maintenance, if that's ever good, will be nice. RGO output plus 10%, this is going to be also very nice. There's a lot of RGOs that don't have output in the tree, and if you don't have any output modifiers in this tree, this will actually just represent 10% more RGOs. Like, iron gets like 300% extra in the output in the tree, so this isn't going to help iron production, but for most RGOs, this will be helpful. Now, you're going to have a lot of really, really good kind of sources of good laws slash policies in your republic, or from the republic, starting with virtues of a politier, where you are going to be getting 7.5 total peasant to state satisfaction equilibrium and 2.5% for the rest of your estates, which is going to be quite nice. I do think you unlock this relatively late though, so that is something worth considering. Administrative principles, this is where you get your source of proximity cost reduction. You don't get the 10% proximity cost over land, but instead you get 5% all proximity cost. In particular, this helps a lot for the entry on harbors, where you are going to be trying to stack 100%, and this moves you in that direction. And so I think if you're going naval, going a republic becomes a lot more attractive for a variety of reasons. Also, trade tends to be better or pair really well with naval, so navally oriented countries I think are maybe going to have a better time as a republic, whereas more land oriented ones are going to prefer to be a monarchy. But this is one that is worth noting. And then also Republican electorate law. I'm not entirely sure how good Navy and Army tradition is, but these are giving a source of both of that. You have a couple options, Diplo Rep as well, to reduce the antagonism. I think those are the major ones, but this is also worth mentioning. Now, you have a few sources of Republican tradition, which is the equivalent of legitimacy for you, and so generally speaking, your cost of court will be really kind of a little bit lower by virtue of having these flat sources of Republican tradition, especially if you have some other source from what you have as your country or your nation. You can start approaching not needing to pay for the slider at all, which is very, very nice. Coming in, we also have several estate privileges. The really kind of big ones to point out, and I mean we have a lot, is maintain clerical proceedings, giving us a lot of satisfaction on the clergy. Some of this is at the expense of the burghers, but you don't really care because you tend to get over 100% with the burghers anyways. Most of these are going to be burghers privileges and tend to push you up towards over 100% with the burghers, but you get maintained clerical proceedings, and then you get the 10% tax efficiency off of mandatory clerical donations, which is very, very strong. 10% tax efficiency. This is one of the major points here. And also nice is increased civic engagement, giving you some more Republican tradition for virtually free, because this is not a bad kind of privilege to have in. It does give quite a bit of power to the nobility, but that's not too big a deal for getting another 10% off your total cost for the monthly Republican tradition, allowing you to push more and more towards the complete reduction, which would be very, very nice indeed if you can achieve it. All right, we're still on our Republic nation, but we're talking about monarchy nations here. One of the best ways to expand is via subjects, and have those subjects integrate locations for you and never integrate anything yourself with your cabinet actions. Instead, rely on subjects and effectively use diplomats to integrate your locations by virtue of using diplomats to integrate subjects, although you can just take territory off of them as well and make this really, really diplo cheap overall. And one of the things you run into is going to be, if you have a lot of subjects, is this a country strength of all X countries versus overlord modifier. For both your theocracies and also your republics, you will only be allowed to make vassals unless you have a special rule for your nation, or unless you have a special advance, or you something to this effect. You will only be able to make countries that are vassals, which means you are going to be more pressured by this country strength of all vassal countries versus overlord relative to monarchies, which also gain access to fiefdoms. This is specific to the type of subject, and so the vassal subjects do not contribute to this modifier for fiefdoms, and the fiefdoms do not contribute to this modifier for vassals. And so, effectively speaking, you can have twice as many subjects without running into issues as it relates to loyalty from this modifier if you have access to fiefdoms, which monarchies do. And this is one of the very significant advantages of being able to play a monarchy, is being able to effectively expand more and not be pressured by loyalty as much, preventing annexation of these nations. We made this point earlier, but a big point of monarchies is also it is easier to maintain a stable of crown power characters, which allows and makes it easier to have high crown power. Now, moving on to your tech tree is kind of trash. You gain access to slightly better levies, which are going to, instead of getting 10% morale damage taken reduction, I think you get 25%. There's not really an enormous difference between this and the regular knight, and that's kind of your tech tree. You gain access to a little bit of noble state satisfaction equilibrium in H2. In H4, it's kind of nice that you get army and navy tradition decay. I don't think that this is too crazy a modifier, but it's kind of a hard one to get, and it is going to help you out with morale, I think, is the big thing. And then in H6, you get monthly diplomats, but this is also in H6. You could ignore this, you have to be Vietnamese, but legislative efficiency would be good, but it's diplomats in H6, and that's kind of your tech tree. For government reforms, you don't really get anything useful, and so you can kind of ignore this too, because this is all like country-specific stuff. And then you actually get some useful laws. So to scroll up, you unlock in Age 4 legitimization of power, which is going to give you access to all of these are pretty good. I think the best one's probably this one for all estate satisfaction equilibrium, but you do have some choices. You also have tolerance of heretical or heathen beliefs. You also have crown power plus minus separatism, which I don't think the minus separatism is as good as this, but okay, fair enough. And then you could choose the worst version of estate satisfaction equilibrium. Also somewhat maybe sensible is the monthly legitimacy. And then the Machiavellian one is just trash, but you have other good options if you don't misclick the Machiavellian one. And so that's going to be nice. You also get access to the levy law, which other countries do not have access to, and assuming you go noble levies, you will get levy combat efficiency. Levies are just a backbone of armies in the first 3 ages, and so this represents quite a bit of power that you could potentially have. Currently, this modifier actually doesn't apply correctly, but this is going to get patched at some point, and this will apply correctly, at which point your levies, just generally speaking, in monarchies are going to be a lot better. We'll kind of come back to this when we talk about when we talk about privileges, but just remember they're going to be getting this and another thing, which is going to make their levies stronger. You're also going to gain access to your source. of proximity cost. So you get proximity cost through land minus 10%. It gets tagged on with decentralization, which you're not thrilled with, but you can have this at the start of the game. Just a reminder, the Theocracies also get this. They get it on an estate privilege, minus 10% proximity cost through land, and this is at game start. One of the disadvantages of republics is they get 5% alt procs, which is less, but it goes through naval, which is better, but they get this access to this in age 4. To be fair though, proximity cost reduction gets better the more of it you have, and so it's not super cracked until you're starting to get to that point in the game anyways, and so it's not necessarily super bad that you get it late, but it would definitely be preferable to get it earlier, like monarchies do. You have access to 2 really good buildings. Your sergeantry is also better than the equivalent version for the Republic, but that's not too big a deal. What is kind of nice is you get Royal Court, which is going to give you crown power nice early on. Not as good as the Republican tradition. You would prefer to get to 0.1 legitimacy, but you also gain access to the Royal Garden, which is very nice early on for the monthly diplomats. This is a pretty strong modifier, especially at a time in the game when diplomats are hard to come by. Eventually you start getting a lot of them and it becomes much less of a deal, but this will represent a big chunk of your diplomats that you're getting in the early game coming from this. For your estate privileges, you kind of have a little bit of free satisfaction on this, which is going to be nice. Manorial courts, if I recall correctly, is just bad, but this one is pretty good, especially if levy combat efficiency starts applying correctly. Army levy size plus 10%. Levy combat efficiency plus 25%, and noble levy size plus 20%. This represents a huge uptick in fighting ability, and so just generally speaking, monarchies are going to be able to throw their weight around a lot more with levies at this juncture with this current balance. If levies become less important and regulars become better, this becomes much less of an advantage, but this is going to be something that is really big with the monarchy, in addition to having the additional subject types and also more crown power characters. Just the enormous amount of levy bonuses is going to be a big deal. Fighting as in this run, fighting as a republic, we had to play kind of scared of monarchies just in general because they had way stronger levies, and so this was a little bit of a play pattern, play around. To be fair, we could hire a bunch of mercs, but you're going to have a 25% merc tech for here as well as the nobilities, although you're getting this 2 ages later than the 33% that the republic gets, so not anywhere near as good, but that is going to be the monarchy there. Notably, you can swap between these government types using the Form New Country button. You can see you can reform into a monarchy if you have enough aristocracy, a theocracy if you have enough spiritualist, and you can reform into a republic if you have enough plutocracy. Generally, swapping to republic is the most difficult and would require the most investment, but that has been our discussion between the 3. We have republic, which I think is generally a little bit better at making money, but suffers from lacking some things, and in this particular going to sometimes be better on countries where you're going naval. I think that the monarchy will just generally be better, having some significant advantages in warfare early on, and your ability to expand, and your ability to generate crown power, despite not having a very good tech tree or as much stuff going on economically. And then finally, the theocracy, I think, is just kind of going to never be the best option, and is just generally going to be worse than both a monarchy or a plutocracy, and is not going to be that good. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the YouTube algorithm things. And if you want to support the channel, a really good way to do it is if you are going to buy a Paradox product at full price, you can buy it off the Paradox web store using the code GENERALIST in all caps. This won't give you a discount, but it will send 12% of the sale on my way, and so it's a good way to support the channel at no additional cost to you, but the inconvenience of having to use a code rather than having the thing directly delivered to Steam. But other than all that, y'all have a good one. Bye-bye now.